all leaders of Cybertron as well as primes in my story. This was originally just going to be a video about primes, ones that are actually primes, ones that are only called primes, and then a few other outliers here and there. But I realized that there's a lot of overlap between the primes and the leaders of Cybertron just naturally, so I decided to just merge them into one video. So to start off with, this is basically saying not all primes are worthy of the Matrix. This is the primes logo from the live action movies. I couldn't find another logo for the primes, so that's the one I just used for this. This wouldn't necessarily be the logo in the story if I even decide to have a logo for the primes. Just for a visual example for this, that's the one I decided to use. But yeah, not all primes are worthy of the Matrix. The Matrix isn't the only way someone can become a prime. Basically, any character can become a prime with Primus's power. That's how the original 13 were made, and that's why the Matrix makes characters primes, because it channels his Primus's power. There are other ways that a character can become a prime. So to start off with, there's of course the 13 primes. I'll probably do another video at some point in the future going into further detail about the 13. Just I don't think it's really necessary for this. They were, the rulers of Cybertron for quite a while until the Great Cataclysm. It was around this time that Primer took the Matrix off of the Starsaber and handed it to Alpha Trion. After the Great Cataclysm, a few different nations started to prop up, each having their own leader, and over time there was conflict and war until some of those nation leaders came together to form the Guiding Hand. So my Guiding Hand is very different to the IDW's one. The Guiding Hands in IDW are basically what the 13 primes are in most fiction, so I essentially swapped what the Guiding Hand and the 13 are in mine. The cast, as you can see, is pretty similar. I've got 4 out of the 5 members from IDW. Of course, I kicked off Primus, because Primus is the creator of Transformers in my story. I replaced him with Prime On, and then I also added Nova and Logos. Not Nova Prime and Logos Prime, just Nova and Logos. Nova and Logos are brothers, and they don't know this, but they're actually descendants of the 13th Prime, who I'm calling Optronica, and I'm saying is a female character, because why not? They always wanted to be primes, and eventually, growing tiresome of the Guiding Hand, they decide to betray them and kill them all. But Nova isn't satisfied. He kills Logos, and takes command for himself, dubbing himself Nova Prime, and he becomes the leader of Cybertron for a very long time. Eventually he decides to leave the planet. I did have an idea for it, but I've forgotten it, so I don't know why he leaves Cybertron, not currently. I'll figure out something later on. Maybe it's connected to the dead universe, maybe it's not, I'm not entirely sure as of right now, but he leaves Guardian Prime in command of Cybertron whilst he's gone. Someone who he's able to easily manipulate. But what he doesn't see coming is that Guardian Prime didn't do such a great job at protecting Cybertron, and it came under siege from the Quintessons. This is where the Quintessons take over for a very long time, implement the caste system, functionism, all of this, right? It's around this time that Alpha Trion gives the Matrix to this Predacon. Now this is not Grimlock, I'm just using the design because I think it works for what I want. You could say that maybe the Dinobots are infected by this specific species of Predacon's DNA, and that's why they look like dinosaurs or whatever. He sends his team of Predacons to prehistoric Earth, where they meet the Maximals. And after those Predacons die, Optimus Primal decides to keep hold of the Matrix. He doesn't become a Prime. Originally I was going to have him become a Prime and go into his Optimal Optimus form, but I think I'm going to keep that separate. I just don't want him to become a Prime, because I think Optimus Prime should be the next true Prime since the original 13, not Optimus Primal, And then the next thing, I should say this is roughly in timeline order. There's probably a few things out of order. This is roughly in timeline order. The next thing that happens is that Zeta and a group of other bots overthrow the Quintessons. They find a captured Guardian Prime, and he gives Zeta the moniker of Prime. And he rules over Cybertron for a very long time until the war starts and he's killed. Quotation marks. I'm thinking that he might fake his death and then come back later, but for now we'll just say he's killed. And his apprentice takes over as leader of Cybertron, Sentinel Prime. Now Sentinel Prime in my story isn't going to be as evil as he is in most. He's actually going to want to try and do what's best for Cybertron. But due to his upbringing, the way he was brought up, how he thinks, he doesn't do a great job. And this is around the time that the war started, so he is the leader of the Autobots now, not really the leader of Cybertron. Up next, Optimus Primal hands the Matrix over to Orion Pax, who's on Earth now, and he becomes Optimus Prime. He is now the leader of the Autobots, but Sentinel is still like the public face. He feels that announcing that all previous Primes after the 13 were all fake, they were all posers, and now this random guy off on another planet is now actually the leader, could cause chaos. The next event in the timeline would be Overlord forcing Rung to create a clone of the Matrix, that being the Matrix of Chaos. He then gives that to Hot Rod and it corrupts him into Rodimus Unicronus. But he is purged of the Dark Energon and is reverted back to Hot Rod, and the Matrix of Chaos ends up in Autobot containment. Until Sideways, posing as an Autobot, takes the Matrix of Chaos, gives it to an Optimus Prime clone that the Decepticons made that was also in Autobot containment, and he becomes Nemesis Prime. Now this next part, there's going to be a red square in the top right hand corner. This is stuff I'm not sure on. This is stuff that I've been thinking about. I might implement, I might not implement. I'm not entirely sure yet. But it's a sort of arc inspired by Transformers 1. Optimus will essentially say to Sentinel that he's thinking of coming forward as the leader of Cybertron. Sentinel Prime doesn't really like that, so he forces Rung to create another clone of the Matrix that doesn't require the user to be worthy in order to become a Prime. So he'll get this clone of the Matrix and become a proper Prime, not a false Prime, even though he's not worthy of the Matrix. I'm also potentially thinking that Scourge could get this Matrix. As part of his characterization is that he believes it's his birthright to become a Prime. I didn't mention this earlier, but Optimus Prime and his siblings are the descendant of Logos, who is of course a descendant of the 13th. So they are the descendants of the 13th. So Scourge thinks it's his birthright to be a Prime. So I think that could be interesting. I'm not sure if I want to or not, but yeah. Then when a true worthy Prime gets that copy Matrix, the Sentinel and Scourge would revert back to their regular bodies. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not entirely sure. Again, this is very sort of not super thought out. Might implement it, might not. I might cut this whole thing. But this next part is why I really want to keep it. Because even if Optimus does take over public command of the Autobots, he'd still need someone on Cybertron. And that person on Cybertron, I think, Moonracer as a Prime. Now, of course, she's not worthy of this Matrix, but Optimus gives it to her regardless. And I imagine her Prime form would be inspired by this Lunar Cruiser Prime, because I think it's just really cool. But that's the end of the red square section. We're back onto more solid stuff now, with a continuation of the Matrix of Chaos. Megatron has his dark matter form. These next like 2 slides I've spoken about before in a previous video. Basically, he rips the Matrix of Chaos out of Nemesis Prime's chest so that he can use it to keep his dark matter form stabilized, because otherwise it will start eating away at his body. And then afterwards, Leo Breaker ends up getting it and turns into Nemesis Breaker. If you want to know more about this, I made a video talking about the final fight between Optimus and Megatron that goes into further detail about how all that happens. Up next is Optimus uses the Matrix to sort of put Unicron to sleep, and by doing that it absorbs lots of dark energon. He then drops it and gets into a fight with Galvatron, which leaves him dead. Because the Matrix is full of dark energon, which I should say, I've mentioned this in previous videos, the Matrix, its job is to absorb dark energon from things. It can then be used to let that out in powerful attacks, but if too much of it is stored up inside the Matrix, it gets let out as a creature. This is the Anti-Prime, which is my take on the Dark Matrix from the Marvel Comics. So Hot Rod and Ultra Magnus get into a fight with him until Hot Rod gets the Matrix and becomes Rodimus Prime. At this point, the Anti-Prime shifts its form to resemble that of Rodimus, and Rodimus is able to take him out by absorbing bits of it and letting out the Dark Energon as massive attacks. Later on, when Optimus Prime is revived, Rodimus hands the Matrix back to him. And it's around this point that the war would end and Optimus becomes the proper ruler of Cybertron, until he decides to hand that position over to Windblade, someone who would have been helping him a lot with ruling Cybertron, and he feels that she's much better suited for the job than he is, because he's more of a combat leader than he is a leader of a planet. He might be able to lead a team, he might be able to lead a small town, but not really a planet. It's also around here that he decides that he wants to pass on the Matrix. So he sets up this exam competition type thing, and they eventually round down the contestants to 5, which the Matrix itself gets to choose from, and ultimately it picks Alita, turning her into Ultima Prime. Optimus and Alita also have the ability to combine into Orthea. Then Optimus dies. Ultima really wants to bring him back. I mean, of course she would. Since when primes die, their consciousness goes into the Matrix, she tries to use the Zodiac, the last remaining aspect of the One's power, to bring Optimus's consciousness out of the Matrix and into a new body that they made for him. Unfortunately, the Zodiac opens a portal, sends the new body and the Matrix to Earth, where it's found by a human called Jinrai, and makes him the first and only non-Cybertronian Prime, where he's able to attach to and control this body. It's here where things get a little bit messy, where there's like a lot of gaps in the timeline, whereas everything before has been sort of event, then event, then event, maybe a few gaps here and there. This next part is very, very gappy. But at some point after this, Starsaber takes over command of Cybertron. Then sometime later, Fire Convoy, and this is the design I'm using for him at the moment, finds the Matrix on Jinrai's dead corpse. Maybe he just leaves the body behind and makes a life for himself. Not entirely sure yet, but he finds the Matrix on the dead body of Jinrai and becomes Fire Prime. I'm using the name Fire Convoy for his pre-Prime form and then Fire Prime afterwards. Maybe I'll come up with something better. Maybe I'll think of a better design than this one. I don't know. Now he's also able to share the power of the Matrix with his cousin to form Omega Prime. Now again, there's a bit of a gap here, not entirely sure how big the gap is, but Diatlas takes over command of Cybertron from Starsaber. And then yet again, there's a big gap and also a missing part. I don't know what happens with the Matrix between Fire Prime and this next bit, but it does eventually get into the hands of Cheetor and he becomes Alpha Trizer. Now this is not the Cheetor design for most of my story. He does have his classic design for a lot of it, but at the point that he gets the Matrix, he looks like this, where basically he's got Predacon DNA and like infused in him and it makes him more powerful. Now again, there's a big jump here, but the next Prime, I should have probably put the Matrix here, but the next Prime is Autonomous Maximus. Not only is he the last Prime, but eventually he's also the last Cybertronian. So that's it, all Primes and leaders from the very first Cybertronians all the way to the last one. Except there's one more thing I want to add on, because there's a group of Cybertronians that I've been contemplating making Primes. Maybe Primes, maybe not Primes, maybe Primes in abilities but not in names. I'm not entirely sure, and it's all related to the Star Harvester. So one thing that bugged me a lot in the early days of making my story is, where does Energon come from? Where does all this energy come from? You can't just make energy. So I took a concept from the live action movies, the Star Harvester, and worked it into my stories, where basically there is a Star Harvester on Cybertron that will harvest solar energies from suns of galaxies that Cybertron passes by, since Cybertron is a lone planet that just sort of travels through space. But I wanted a way that Cybertron would know if the suns that they're harvesting from have life or not, which is why I created a sort of lineage. These characters I'm calling Star Seekers. There's a reason for that I'll get to later. But I'm calling them Star Seekers, and they live a solitary life on Cybertron's moons. They travel to nearby solar systems and see if the suns there are capable of supporting life. If they are not capable of supporting life, then they will happily harvest solar energy. If so, then they will divert course to try and find a new solar system. The first one of these is Septimus. Now maybe Septimus Prime, if I'm making them primes. I'm not going to say this every single time because it will get very repetitive, so just keep that in mind. He's the first one. He dies in a fight with Megatronus when Megatronus tries to use the Star Harvester to harvest energy from a sun that can support life. This is also what eventually leads to the Great Cataclysm. His replacement is Regulus Prime. Now there's no visual example of Regulus Prime. This is literally the only time they've appeared in fiction as far as I'm aware, but you know, I wanted more than just like 3. So, you know, Regulus Prime. The next one, and this is where we get to why Starseeker is important, the next one is Thundertron. Now he actually is a little bit smarter than the other ones because he asks Primus if he can have some companions, and Primus agrees. Primus gives him a pet and a friend, Nightstrike and Filch. But eventually they decide they don't really like what they're doing. You know, living this relatively solitude life, just going out and looking at suns, blah, 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 blah. So eventually they just leave Cybertron and they start the Star Raiders. Because I personally prefer the name Star Raiders over Star Seekers. And Star Seekers just works really well for this group of characters because they're seeking stars. So, you know, And then finally, the last one as of now is Nominus Prime, which I don't think this technically fits his character super well, but who cares? Like, it's Nominus Prime. I don't think many people are going to be caring that much about Nominus Prime, but I just thought Nominus Prime would be the last one. Maybe another one after him, I don't know. But he would actually be allowed to travel to Cybertron and intermingle, so, you know, we don't get another Thundertron situation. And he reveals himself to Cybertron's populace, and Cybertron says, like, well, we can help you with that, because this would be relatively late in the story, I imagine around Starsaber's time or something. And they're like, well, we can help you with that, you know, you don't have to do this alone. So then they sort of get together a team, and it sort of becomes like a military operation instead of just one guy living on the moon. But yeah, I'm not sure if I want these guys to actually be primes or not. Maybe, maybe not. But yeah, that's it. Those are all of the primes, starting from the very first Cybertronians, going all the way to the last ones. And I think that's it.